Were the greatest villains throughout history truly evil, or just misunderstood geniuses? Let us try for a moment to defend Lord Voldemort, the most feared figure in the wizarding world. Yes, he was a murderer. Yes, thousands of people died because of him, and the wizarding world was plunged into darkness for years. But was this self-proclaimed Dark Lord really wrong? Or was he just a man trying to construct his own reality? The history books are always written by the victors, and perhaps we, in this story told through the eyes of Dumbledore and Harry Potter, are missing the points where Voldemort might have been right. But do we dare to consider this possibility? Before we begin, please don't forget to like the video and subscribe. It is clear that Voldemort is a tyrant, that he kills people mercilessly and wants to rule the wizarding world by his own cruel rules. However, when we look deeper into his motivations, we can see that some of his ideas make sense, at least in certain respects. Perhaps the greatest enemy of the wizarding world was in fact the one who spoke the harshest truth. At the heart of Voldemort's ideology was the idea that wizards were superior to Muggles. At first glance, this may seem like an unacceptable discrimination. But there is no denying that wizards are quite different from ordinary people in their abilities and powers. A wizard can literally defy the laws of physics, heal fatal wounds, and even bend time, while Muggles, despite their technological advances, lack these abilities. Now let us pause for a moment and think. Throughout history, have two peoples with a difference in power ever been able to coexist peacefully? In human history, more advanced civilizations have either exploited or destroyed less advanced ones. This is exactly what Voldemort feared. According to him, if the balance between Muggles and wizards was not maintained, one day the wizards would be hunted down and destroyed. Is this a completely impossible scenario? Let's not forget that there have been witch hunts in the wizarding world in the past, and many wizards have been killed by the Muggles out of fear and ignorance. Could it be that the Wizarding Council, which argues that the wizarding community should be hidden from the Muggles and tries to protect this secrecy, is actually an indication that Voldemort's concerns are justified? Was he really wrong to want to build a strong wizarding society instead of hiding? One of Voldemort's most controversial ideas was the superiority of pure-blood wizards. Naturally, this view poses a major ethical problem. But from Voldemort's perspective, perhaps his real concern was not so much racial superiority as the continuation of the wizarding legacy. It is a fact that while the number of mongrels and Muggle-born wizards in the wizarding world is increasing, the number of pure-blood wizarding families is decreasing. Pure-blood wizarding families are made up of people who have grown up with magic for generations and have preserved their traditions and knowledge. If pure-blood wizards were to disappear completely, the knowledge and culture of the wizarding world would also be largely lost. It would be a loss of knowledge, like the loss of ancient languages. Voldemort's thinking was perhaps a drastic measure to preserve the wizarding heritage. His path was obviously wrong, but when we think about the future of the wizarding world, could he have been right in some respects? Voldemort's greatest belief was that power is the greatest truth in the world. According to him, people were naturally inclined to bow down to the strong and oppress the weak. When we look at his own past, we see that he was a weak and lonely child in an orphanage. But it was only when he discovered his power that he was able to exist as a real individual. Fear and power meant control for him. Let's look at the history of the wizarding world for a moment. In a world where even a powerful wizard like Grindelwald rebelled against authority, where the Wizarding Council struggled for years with its own internal bureaucracy, and where many wizards were cowardly in the face of real threats, is there any point where Voldemort could be right? Can power really be the only guarantee of order? In conclusion, it is easy to reject Voldemort's ideology outright, because the way it is practiced is horrible. But might some of his concerns and ideas be worth at least questioning, especially about the future of the wizarding world? When we look at Voldemort's life, we see that he never really valued feelings of love or friendship. Compared to other great leaders in the wizarding world, therein lies his biggest difference. Even when Dumbledore parted ways with Grindelwald, he valued friendship and forgiveness. Time and time again, Harry overcame adversity by relying on friends and loved ones. Voldemort, however, thought that power was absolute and believed that emotions were weakness. This was one of his biggest misconceptions. It is possible to rule people through fear, but in the long run, fear always leads to rebellion and downfall. Voldemort did not even trust his most loyal followers, the Death Eaters. He kept them by keeping them afraid. But fear is a much more fragile bond than loyalty. Eventually, even those he trusted most began to betray him. Snape's loyalty to Dumbledore, the Malfoy family's estrangement from him at the end of the war, and the fact that most of the Death Eaters turned on Voldemort as soon as he fell, are proof of this. If Voldemort had a better understanding of human psychology, perhaps he could have built an empire not only through power, but also through loyalty and devotion. But for him, the only reality was absolute control, and this was the biggest mistake that led him to destruction. One of the most criticized aspects of Voldemort's ideology is his hatred of Muggles and Muggle-born wizards. However, it is important to realize that this hatred contains a great contradiction. Although Voldemort presented himself as a pure-blood supremacist, he was himself a mulatto. His father was a Muggle, and he could never accept this fact. This shows that his ideology was actually built on his own personal traumas. If power really is the most important thing in the wizarding world, what does it matter whether a wizard is pure-blooded or not? When a wizard of half-Muggle descent like Dumbledore became one of the most powerful wizards in history, when a wizard of Muggle blood like Harry was able to defeat Voldemort, how valid is the claim that pure blood is superior in magic? Voldemort was blinded by his own hatred and inner contradictions to evaluate truly powerful wizards. For example, a half-breed like Snape served him for years, but Voldemort never saw his true loyalty. A Muggle-born wizard like Hermione was far more skilled and knowledgeable than many pure-blood wizards. If Voldemort had really set up a system based on individual talent instead of pure blood, perhaps he could have created a more powerful order, but blind hatred prevented him from acting rationally. One of Voldemort's greatest goals was to become immortal. Death was his greatest weakness, and he tried in every way to avoid it. The destruction of his soul by making Horcruxes was the greatest demonstration of this fear. But ironically, in trying to become immortal, he made himself even weaker. Many powerful figures in the wizarding world have managed to face death and accept that it is a natural process. Dumbledore's refusal to use the Philosopher's Stone, Harry's self-sacrifice, and even Snape's confrontation with his past in his final moments show that they can exist without losing their powers. Voldemort, on the other hand, was driven by fear of death and destroyed himself both physically and mentally. The Horcruxes dissipated his power and made him physically terrifying. Every step he took in fear of death actually brought his end closer. If Voldemort had accepted mortality not as a weakness, but as a part of reality, he might have been a more powerful figure. But for him, death was his greatest enemy, and it was this fear that destroyed him. Voldemort had enormous power in the wizarding world, but he was a leader who did not understand how power should be used. He tried to rule people through fear, but failed to realize that fear does not bring loyalty. He was mired in pure-blood ideology, but failed to see that this ideology had no logical basis. He tried to escape death, but in doing so, he destroyed his own soul and existence. If he had made different choices, if he had backed power not only with fear and oppression, but also with loyalty and rationality, perhaps he could have shaped the wizarding world according to his ideals. But in the end, his greatest enemy was not Harry Potter, but his own mistakes and misguided beliefs. Power is only meaningful when it is in the right hands. If a leader only feeds power through fear and hatred, he or she will eventually fall victim to the fear he or she has created. So did Voldemort really have the potential to be a great leader, or was he doomed to lose from the start? Perhaps the real question is, do we recognize the powerful as right, or do we try to make the right powerful?